Hello and welcome back to the Covey Wellness Center podcast. Thanks for tuning in today to hear a chat with Rebekah Wright. Some of you will know Rebekah from a previous episode on ADHD, and you'll have a sense of who she is. She's one of our psychotherapists here at Covey Wellness Center, and she has a special interest in working with teens. And so we're going to talk about teens and what they're facing today in terms of their mental health, focusing primarily on anxiety and depression, but generally just diving into that age group particularly and how we can support them through therapy and what kind of needs we're seeing with kids that we're meeting with today. So I won't reintroduce Rebekah because she's been introduced earlier on the podcast in that earlier episode. And so if you want to be introduced formally to her, you can go back and give that a listen. It's a great episode. But we're just going to jump right into the topic. And I'm just going to start out with a few comments about why, teens are really on our radar. So in general, we've all had a really tough few years, and there's been a lot of upheaval and a lot of changes and a lot of pivoting and a lot of challenges socially, culturally, medically, and we're coming out of a time where there's a lot of repair and restoration that needs to be done. And I think there's lots of reasons for that. But generally speaking, we're just seeing that kids are really struggling. And there's always challenges with being a teenager that are normal for kids to struggle with and need support in their mental health. But it is particularly hard, I think, for kids coming out of the pandemic and the losses of that and the separation from friends, the lack of social connection, the disengagement from things like sports and clubs and teams and that kind of stuff. So we're generally seeing that kids are struggling, and we really have a heart to support them. And so we're just wanting to sort of start off and talk a little bit about why that's on our radar, why we're wanting to do an episode today about that. So let's just start off. I'm going to throw it to you, Rebekah, with why do you think we're seeing the anxiety and depression so commonly in teens, either right now or in general?
Yeah, I think that you mentioned some different contextual things that we're kind of going through post-pandemic. But just generally speaking, we think of anxiety and depression as separate entities. And so we think they're not related, but in reality, they're like flip sides of a coin, right? So when you have too much anxiety, your body's like nervous system's heightened. But then at the other end, if it stays in that context for too long, it will kind of drop into the depressed state. So you see
Mm,
these anxiety depression scales when you feel like what's happening around you is outside of your window of tolerance. So
mhm.
when your experiences are above what you can handle, your body will go into a nervous system up or down. So for the pandemic, let's say, right, you have coping mechanisms that you can use as a team to keep it within your window of tolerance, right? Like a friend doesn't like you, or they're making TikToks about you, and it's like, well, I can go talk to my other friends about it, or I can go to my sports team and feel like, okay, yeah, I actually am really good at this thing. Whatever they have to say, it doesn't really matter. But when you strip away the coping mechanisms, now
Mhm.
these experiences become outside their window of tolerance, which means they're more likely to develop one or the other. And if they develop
Mhm.
one or the other, there's a chance that they'll flip flop,
Right.
right? Because if you go into a depressed state, you're not doing well in grades, your parents aren't getting chores done, like your parents are mad
Mhm.
because you don't do the things around the house. And then there's all this anxiety being like, if I don't snap out of this, then there's so much I'm going to lose. So then they go into anxiety, and it's like this very constant flip flopping. But in reality, it's things that are happening that are
Mhm.
outside of our window of tolerance. And with
Right.
the pandemic, we've had so much more outside of our window of tolerance because we've lost our coping mechanisms. And the reality is that, I mean, teens social life, it's changing with media. I know there's like lots of things going on and people are
Mhm.
talking about it, but like it is just not the same anymore. You can make a TikTok and it go viral about somebody in your school, and it can be completely untrue, but it yet ruins your life, right? Life
Mhm.
as a
Mhm.
teen. So it's happening more, I think, or at least it's well known for a variety of factors. One, we can talk about mental health more.
Mm-hmm.
Two, we have a lot of things outside of our window of tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have like the normal stuff. Like teens are not adults.
Mm-hmm.
Teens are, when we treat them like adults, we expect them to have like these things. They're not adults. They're kids.
Right.
They're developmentally not there. Their brain, their frontal lobe, everything we need, the adulting part of our brain, it's just not there. So
Yeah.
you're just going to get less. So you think about, oh, well, I can manage this stress or I can cope with these feelings, but kids don't have the ability to cope with them to the extent
Mm.
that adults do. I'm not saying that they don't, but it's just not to the extent.
Yeah.
And then let's just, if we're making a cake, let's add some hormones in there
Right.
and
Yes.
some confusion. And then we got ourselves like a really nice, really great cake of anxiety and depression everywhere.
Right. Yeah, so a couple things stand out to what you're saying. Like it's really understanding that it's the nervous system activating outside that tolerance into that hyper arousal, which presents more like anxiety, or that hypo arousal, which presents more like withdrawal, disengagement, depression, etc. So again, it's really being outside of what we're able to manage and keep sort of our system from functioning optimally. We're outside of that optimum range. And I think another thing that's really important is that, that's a fluctuating thing. So if in any given day we have, an increase in stressors, that we can then use some coping mechanisms to bring back down. Maybe we have a really hard test in period 4, and then we're able to go to our track practice after school, and that exercise kind of takes all that adrenaline from the test out of our system. We're able to sort of complete a loop to manage what's happening in our bodies and in our nervous system. And what happens when we're not able to complete those loops in a reasonable amount of time is it starts to accumulate. Right. And so then there's this sense in which, over time, as we are adding more and more stressors with fewer and fewer de-stressors, we start to have like a disproportionate amount of one acting on our nervous system. And so it's really easy to understand how coping through a prolonged, I'll call it a state of emergency, or at least feeling like a crisis for that long through the pandemic, and navigating all of those changes and constant unknown and uncertainty and fear and whatever else was coming up for people, disconnect and relational problems that existed through that. I mean, that's true for so many who went through the pandemic, but teens and children, because of how it impacted the school systems, I think were very, adversely affected, and they were having to sustain that over time without those sort of normal, if you will, things in their regular lives to decompress some of that. And so we have a bit of a buildup that needs some time to recover. Does that make sense to
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, for sure. I
Yeah.
mean, it is a buildup. And I think that's people, I deal with youth, right? But then I also deal with parents. So I'm doing family parts, but then I'm doing both. And you get this like, oh, I have anxiety and depression from youth now. Everybody's saying I have anxiety and depression from a teen. And the parents
Mm-hmm.
like, you don't have it. There's no official diagnosis. And it's like we have
Mm-hmm.
this disconnect because everybody's like their buzzwords. If I have
Mm-hmm.
anxiety and depression, maybe that explains my life. And so teens are wanting to explain it because they're so confused. Like, what is happening to their body? Why are they so
Right.
triggered? Why is this happening? And then parents go, it's like, oh, you're using it as an excuse.
Mm.
Oh, you're just, and then it's like, we're getting this disconnect from parents and teens. So now
Mm-hmm.
you add the pandemic in the mix, and then you get parents saying,
Mm-hmm.
oh, it's the pandemic's fault. That's the way my kids are this way.
Mm-hmm.
So that disconnect, that's a relational disconnect. That is not going to be helping your window of tolerance. So if
That's
you
right.
add that into the mix, you get, all the controversies over diagnoses and things like that. But you need your kid to have a safe place at home if school, friends is not safe or it's not
Mm-hmm.
reliably safe because there's too many consistent changing factors.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have a safe place at home because you're being constantly fighting with your parents because they think you should be doing something, but you're like, no, I have this diagnosis, like I have these symptoms, and the reality is that symptoms consistently equals a diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that you're having these symptoms is enough for something.
Mm-hmm.
But you get
Right.
kids wanting to have meaning and parents who are like trying to figure out what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So adding that disconnect, like kids need to find a safe place. And if you can't find a safe place because everybody's confused, then anxiety is going to go up or depression is going to go up because people give up.
Right. It's interesting to think about how the combination of factors that go into how we're doing. I think sometimes we want to put things in a box, and so I think it's nice to blow this conversation open about anxiety and depression, because I think we want to be in one lane and we want it to all nicely, line up. But the truth is, there's always a combination of factors, and if we think, I like the CBT model for thinking about ourselves, if you will, as an ecosystem. So we exist within an environment or a situation, and then we have our thoughts and feelings, our physical reactions, our emotions, our behaviors. All these things are swirling around within this ecosystem. And if we introduce changes in any of those things, if our environment changes, if our thought patterns change, if our feelings change, if we're more afraid, for example, because of the pandemic, if our environment changes because we're disconnected from people, all of these factors are kind of swirling around in the ecosystem, if you will, of ourselves, and not finding equilibrium very easily. And so it's very hard to say, X plus Y equals Z when we're talking about mental health, because there are a lot of things. And so I think meaning comes a lot from understanding those factors and beginning to tease out those pieces and looking at, okay, if I can make some changes in this area, what is the ripple effect in terms of that equilibrium? Is it bringing more calm? Is it bringing more clarity, more meaning? Am I moving things towards the direction of health? But a lot of that ecosystem disruption, however that happens, again, we're talking about pandemic, but this can happen through all sorts of things that are happening in the lives of teens, in their families, with their parents, with their own health, with siblings, with challenges at school. Like, we didn't, anxiety and depression was a thing before the pandemic. And perhaps it's met the pandemic, and sort of we talk about amplifying things where two things meet, and then, like, we think about waves, when the waves meet, they amplify. And that's kind of what we have a little bit here with the pandemic for a lot of kids. So it's interesting because there is a debate, and you and I talked a bit about this, I think, even with the ADHD conversation, but about, where diagnosis is helpful and where it's not, and that for some people it's highly clarifying and meaning making and helpful, and for others it doesn't serve that purpose. Sometimes it can feel like a label that they don't want to carry. And so, again, very specific to the clients we're working with, how we want to talk about how they're struggling, because a lot of their anxiety and depression is very normal responses to what they've been through. So it's not really disordered. I think that's so hard, even with PTSD language. I prefer, post-traumatic stress recovery as opposed to post-traumatic stress disorder, because yes, in a way your body is in disorder, but it's also, and you are not disordered, right? Like you are responding to, a situation. Your body is responding normally to a very abnormal situation.
100%.
So, so I think that's something too, to be able to have those conversations about, okay, well, whether we are calling it anxiety or depression, whether we're calling it post-pandemic, repercussions, whatever we're calling it, kids are struggling with these kinds of things. And can you maybe just outline some of the types of things that you would see as sort of presenting symptoms for a child studying with anxiety and depression? Like, maybe you can walk us through just a few sort of top liners for that, where we can go back and forth.
Well, typically, I mean, you get the parents reaching out to me, whether it's my agency job or private practice, right? So they're reaching out. Parents notice things first, right? So what the problem to a parent isn't necessarily a problem to the child or the youth. So parents will say they're not doing their chores. They don't get out of their room. They video game all day. They're always on their phone. They don't interact anymore. Okay. Or they're having breakdowns. They're having panic attacks. I I can't get them to sleep. They
They don't
don't
want to go
sleep
to
anymore.
school.
They don't want to go to school. So
Yeah.
that's what brings them in, because the
Mm-hmm.
youth is not usually saying something's wrong, I need help. It's the
Mm-hmm.
parents. But now it's completely different for the youth. Now the youth is going through something usually quite different than what the parent sees. So
Right.
those are the presenting factors.
Right.
That's what
Right.
the youth mentioned. Oh no, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're allowed to have
Okay.
visitors. We're pet friendly online here at Cubby Wellness
Okay.
Center. For those of you listening into the audio, Rebecca's lovely little cat just came by for a visit.
Mm-hmm. Very passionate about the topic too.
Yeah, pet therapy, right? So,
Yes.
but yeah, you're right. Like there's sort of there's an observation usually on the side of people who are caring for the children and teens that there's been a difference and there's been a change. And again, what that can entirely be attributed to is hard, but it brings about worry or concern for the parent because they see
Yeah.
the disengagement, they see the not wanting to get out of bed, they see melancholy, they see them dissociating or numbing out on devices or video games or whatever it is, the disconnecting socially, not signing up for things. We've really noticed that with our family, with a lot of sports, that my boys are really engaged in sports, and doesn't seem like kids are coming out in the same numbers that they were pre-pandemic. Like they're not joining in, they're not as
Yeah.
active. And so things like that are sort of red flags for parents, like, wait a second, my kid used to love to play baseball and now he doesn't want to play baseball at all. And so they're
Yeah.
asking those questions. And then we've got teens who are often going through hormonal changes and puberty and
Mm-hmm.
and career strife, trying to figure out their whole life at 15
Yeah.
years old. There's a lot of things on them as well inside of all of that, and so it's presenting a certain way. But what would you say the teens would say about how they're feeling, as some general comments? Like, what's their perspective on that?
It depends where they're at in terms of their readiness to change, but oftentimes I'll get like it's fine. I just don't want to do
Yeah.
it anymore, or I just don't have the motivation. I hear that one a lot. I don't have
Yeah.
the motivation to do things, so then I just don't do them. Or I can't stop thinking. Like my head just won't stop. Like
Mm,
it's always going and going and going. So that's both the anxiety and then the depression
yeah.
aspects. Those will be symptoms that'll come up the most. Um, but they won't. The thing is with teens is when you don't have a fully developed brain, you can't
Mm-hmm.
always make sense of your experiences. So you get fragments, you get pieces. So it's
Yeah.
like I can't sleep, I'm having a lot of thoughts and they can't stop, but I don't really know how to make sense of it.
Yeah.
So you'll get fragments with the teens, and the parents usually have some type of narrative. They usually have a way to explain what's happening.
Mm-hmm.
But teens are fragmented experiences that a therapist or someone would need to kind of piece together to make sense
Mm-hmm.
for them, because a lot of the time parents are going, why are you doing this? Why don't you have motivation? Just do it. And the kids are
Yeah.
like, I don't know. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. So how do I explain to you what I don't even understand in myself?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's an issue there too.
And then that can drive them more into what they're struggling with, because if their parents are expecting something that they can't deliver on, or that they don't understand, then they're feeling even poorer about themselves. Their self-talk is even worse in some cases, like, oh, now my parents are upset with me too and I don't know what's wrong. So there's a lot of pieces happening there. And I think yeah, I think with kids too, so much is social. Like what I would say most people report is the relational spaces. What's happening with their friends, what's happening on this team, what that person said about that person, what, even if it's not about them directly, concern for someone else in their social circle that's going through a breakup, or is being
Yeah,
mistreated, and social media escalates a lot of
yeah,
those dynamics. And I feel like that's a really, really big part of teen experience, is
yeah.
their relational world. And that comes up a lot. And there's a lot of that parents just don't know, because A, they're not telling their parents, but B, they're not in their world. And I remember being
Yeah.
a teacher, you would be immersed in that and you would see the dynamics. And a lot of the work I did as a teacher, in and out of the classroom, but especially when I was doing student success, was really looking at a lot of the social dynamics that were wreaking havoc on people's emotional well-being. And
Yeah.
it was really a struggle, and it was very hard for them to be functioning well in class while this girl drama or something was going on. Like they just, so it was really looking at the holistic ecosystem for that particular, teen. So there's just so many factors. And,
Yeah.
we want to talk to this is where, again, therapy can be important because it can help build a little bit of a bridge of understanding between parent and teen.
Yeah.
But also it can give teens language to be able to have those conversations themselves, to empower them, to express what's happening, to give language to what's happening, even from a psychoeducational, like what's going on in my body
Yeah.
that's causing these symptoms, And I do feel like body is what usually is a giveaway for a lot of teens that come to me. Like a lot of teens, would reach out even at school. It's like, I just feel like my heart is racing all the time, or I can't eat, my stomach's turning all the time, or I can't get out of bed. Like it's often physiological symptoms before they've made the connection with thoughts and feelings. Would
Yeah.
you see that as well?
100%. I mean,
Yeah.
kids are so not in their bodies nowadays, like, right, like when you have all this television and video games, and we're not in our bodies, we're not outside playing games. Now, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing or good thing. I'm just saying that if we're not in our bodies, it's hard to recognize what our bodies are going through, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you have a kid who's had a stomach ache and it takes them too long to realize they had a stomach ache, well, then their understanding of what triggered that stomach ache is going to be skewed
Right.
because it took them too long. They didn't realize that it was the next day and something yesterday triggered it.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't have teens in their bodies, or maybe they're too in their bodies and they don't know how to ground themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely, I mean, anxiety and depression is not a mental and brain issue. It's a
Right.
whole body issue.
Right.
It's your nervous system, your subconscious, like you don't choose to be anxious and you don't choose to be depressed. They're natural responses. Now we can make choices that make us more susceptible to stay in those patterns, but
Mm-hmm.
it's a threat safety response. And
Mm-hmm.
that threat safety goes back to, there's a threat, your body is protecting you before your brain thinks, oh, I wonder if that's dangerous to me.
Right. Yeah.
Your body's going to be the first thing.
Yeah, there's so much going on. Again, that's not, when the question comes from the parents about like, why don't you just get out of bed? That's not an easy answer because it's not, oh, I'm thinking consciously, I'm going to stay in bed today, and this is why. It's more like I'm just here and I feel like my body's not going to let me get up.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, so kind of piecing together the mind body connection, but it is often in physiological symptoms that we recognize, yeah, we're dealing with this. And I think also there's a general perception that, and I still don't understand this fully, but I know that, like if I think about the way I worked as a teacher, there were days where I could go through an entire day and not have a drink of water, not eat something, not go to the washroom, be so disconnected from basic needs of my body. I could go like a 6-hour stretch and then at the end wonder why I had a headache, why I was feeling
Yeah.
faint. It's like, well, there's a lot of logical reasons, but we live very much disconnected and disembodied. And so I can see how that would happen. You can easily distract yourself from the things happening in your body, especially with all the technology around you. It's easy to do that. So, so getting adults and kids alike to be more in tune with, their body wisdom, what it's telling them, understand what it's communicating, because there's a lot of really good information there that we often dismiss to help us understand what's happening, and closing the gap, like you say, on that awareness. Am I checking in enough with myself that I'm recognizing the connections between things, as opposed to sort of barreling through and then not knowing where those symptoms are coming from? Okay, let's jump to, so talking about embodiment, that's something we can give, tools to kids around that to try and be more grounded, be more connected, be listening to things happening and attending to those things. How else can we help teens struggling with anxiety or depression? Like, what are some of those strategies or approaches you'd want to bring forward?
I think the one thing that pops up, especially if you have a parent bringing in a child who has anxiety or depression symptoms, is get help for you. That's the first thing that gets kind
Mm,
of like, that's
like for the
hard
parent.
for the parent. Get help
Yes.
for you because it is
Mm-hmm.
so hard to deal with that. They're not doing what you expect. You're going to probably be triggered. It's exhausting. If they're not pulling their
Mm-hmm.
weight, then probably you're pulling it. And so the first thing I think of is make sure you're feeling supported, whether that's a
Mm-hmm.
therapist or really good friends, not like, look what my teenager did today. Like, not those types of friends, but like friends
Mm-hmm.
who are supportive so that
Mm-hmm.
you can feel your best self when you have to deal with them when they're not their best self. So
Right.
that's the first thing. That actually helps them. It's not like a
Yeah.
selfish thing. It helps them because if you're stable, your nervous system regulation will help to regulate theirs because we
Right.
are
And
connected.
that's right. That co-regulation piece, and it's really prominent with parents and children. And I think that
Yeah.
also there's that piece of like caregiver, like you are the caregiver, and there is some fatigue that can come or stress that can come from caring for someone who's struggling physically, mentally, emotionally.
Yeah.
There is a cost to you to care for that person, and there are very real worries about their well-being, about their future. You might feel really frustrated, but also really concerned.
Yeah.
You might be confused yourself and not
Mm-hmm.
have ways of understanding it. Maybe you haven't faced a similar mental health experience, and so you don't have that personal understanding of what that must feel like, and so you need to build some empathy. But you also, at the same time, the both end of therapy, it's also very frustrating that you can't get your kid to go to school, and you want to hold empathy, but also recognize that like there are some combination of factors here going on for you and for your child in relation to what they're struggling with. So yeah, it's hard because for a point of clarity for people who maybe haven't done therapy before, unless you are doing family therapy, which is an open therapy to meet in different iterations with family members to support their relationships in the family and work together for solutions, your child or teen is doing individual therapy, and there's some very strong parameters and boundaries around what communication can happen with the parent and what can't. And that can feel very isolating to the parent too, because their child is in treatment and they don't really know what's going on, and they're not involved because it's not a family situation. But in terms of the confidentiality, the child's confidentiality has to be protected. And so there is this need for the parent to be able to voice what they're feeling about that and to work through that so they can come back responsibly into the relationship with the kids. So yeah, it can be difficult to navigate. And just as a parent, it's we can't help but worry about our kids and their well-being. And
Yeah.
sometimes the good intentions are there to respond to what they're going through, to try
Yeah.
and bring them through to something better, but they may be misaligned with what's needed. And so caring for yourself, and that is going to help the relational dynamic, and it's going to help you understand better what they're going through, and move you both forward. um
Yeah.
yeah,
For
so
sure.
that's a good point.
And it helps with the narrative, like fix my kid. Like, that
Right.
narrative, like fix my child, they have anxiety or depression, right?
Mm,
When you can say like, well, how can we support you to help them? Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
So it does kind of balance it out. And then another thing I would say is look at your symptoms, look at your surroundings, look at your context. If you're waiting for your teen to give you all the reasons for why they're feeling the way that they do, you will
Hmm.
just be waiting forever.
Good
Right.
point.
So I use it like for instance, like a bomb. You don't need to go in if you go into a room and you see that a bomb went off. Do you need to see the bomb in order to know that the bomb went off? You
Right.
see rubble everywhere.
Right.
Nothing is together. You see black marks everywhere. The person walks in and goes, "Oh, there was a bomb here maybe an hour ago or sometime before this. I don't
Hmm.
know what that bomb was, but I can definitely see the rubble. I can see the
Right.
effect." And so the same thing kind of with parents or friends, or if you're seeing rubble, fill in the blank. There was a bomb of some sort. Now
Hmm.
to put that rubble back together.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes parents are just like digging and digging. What happened? What did you do? What's going on? Why aren't you doing this? The reality is there's rubble everywhere
Yeah.
and they need
Let's
help.
start there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on what the bomb was or how do I fix it, because parents go into fix it mode. How do I
Yeah.
do that? Just deal with you've got rubble in front of you.
Mm.
Your teen needs help, and your teen is also a child and they're not an adult. And so if you
Mm-hmm.
have somebody who just went through a bomb, are you expecting them to pay their taxes on time? Are you
Mm-hmm.
saying, oh, yeah, please, you need to go and get groceries, make sure that there's no house,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Your
Yeah.
expectations change when you're dealing with a house that's just rubble.
Yeah.
And for teens walking into school, it's not safe for them. Like
Mm-hmm.
it isn't safe. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like you have a bunch of threats all around, potential bombs always potentially going off. You never really know when. It's like
Mm-hmm.
walking into a war zone for a teen.
Mm-hmm.
You never know who's going to capture that, who's going to get that on their phone, who's going to say what. So you don't ever get to usually know what the bomb is. Sometimes you
Yeah.
do, and that's great, but just deal with the rebel. Figure
Yeah.
out what you have in front of you and what that person needs based off of that.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not going to get as much resistance. And you might still, but you'll get a little bit less.
Yeah, I think one thing that's coming to mind there too is that there isn't a magic wand that you can wave over that scene and restore it, right? It's small, one block at a time, one sweep of the broom at a time. It's piece by piece, repairing that. It's a process. And so I think sometimes we think, I'm going to send my child to therapy and a switch is going to flip and they'll be fixed, and that's a really unrealistic expectation. But consistently doing sort of that next right thing, what's in front of me that I can attend to recreate safety, to promote health, and it can be very small, consistent steps over time that you're going to see the change. But it's not an instant flip. And it's an ongoing thing. We're all going to be managing our window of tolerance our whole lives with all of the things that come in and out of our lives, big and small. And so, building those coping strategies to not everything's going to be, a huge bomb going off,
Little
but
bombs everywhere,
little
all the
bombs
time.
everywhere,
Yeah.
right? And just little things. It's like, okay, so I can feel myself becoming anxious because my teacher just announced that our final exam is next week and I haven't started to study, and I just feel my body starting to activate. Okay, well, what's the next right thing that you can do? Maybe it's speaking to that friend to get the notes that you missed for the 2 days, that are going to be on it. Maybe it's setting up a study partner. Maybe it's meeting with your guidance counselor. Maybe it's starting to review the topics and make a study note. Maybe it's just deciding that for today, there's not time to deal with that. And tomorrow you're going to look it over, right? So it can be very small things, but being aware of what's happening and then taking those small, manageable steps. We talk a lot about, even in education, about chunking things, breaking
Yeah.
things down into manageable pieces. And when someone is really dealing with mental health issues, it can be very overwhelming and
Yeah.
it can feel like you don't know where to start. So that's something that a therapist can help, is build, a plan and some tools to say, well, let's start here. Let's do this small thing consistently, and then let's layer this on, and let's have those conversations about how your thoughts and feelings are impacting how your body's responding, and start to unpack those things and give some, again, restoring those loops so that
Yeah.
the stuff that's accumulated is starting to actually become tolerable in your system again and not activating. But it is a process and it's ongoing, and it's going to take some time. And so I think it's important for both, parents and teens to remember that it's not instant, that it's not a fix all. If we could, we would absolutely do that for every person. I mean, if we could wave a magic wand and,
Yeah. Well,
we would do that. People would have been doing it for a long time. So, just to be patient in the process and really empathetic that it takes a lot of small steps consistently in the right direction.
and even
So,
just like what you just described, chunking, prioritizing, all of
yeah.
that is frontal lobe, prefrontal cortex.
Mm-hmm.
All of that is, if you have a teen that's reacting because they have a lot of threats, that's the first thing that's going to get shut off.
That's right.
So, that's where the disconnect is, because parents are like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, that's not logical. Here, let's break it down this way. And the teen's going like, no, I can't. And the logic part is turned
Mm-hmm.
down off, and they didn't even have a fully developed one to begin with. So
Mm-hmm.
think of how much they need that, but you can't access that part of them until they're
Mm-hmm.
calm. So figuring
Mm-hmm.
out, how do parents help calm their kids before they do the logic talk, before they do the chunking, before they do all of
Yes.
that, get their nervous system regulated, you will have a lot more success than
Right.
having that whole, we'll just do it this way. This makes sense. Well, yeah, it
Right.
sure does make sense, but they don't see that
And
because
they
they're
can't
reacting.
activate. They can't activate on that. We want their whole,
Exactly.
they have, their brains are still developing, but we want to have those conversations with kids when as much of the brain that they can have access to
Yes.
is available.
Yep.
So yeah, and just for people who may not fully understand what Rebekah's talking about, when you're going into a perceived threat and your body's going into survival mode, it's disconnecting to the prefrontal cortex, which is your decision making. And the best example, easiest example, maybe simplistic, but easiest is that frantic, you're running late for work and you can't find your keys because you can't remember where you left them. And
Mm-hmm.
that kind of a feeling of like, I don't know why I can't figure this out. Whereas if you just took a few deep breaths, calmed your body down, you'd be like, oh yes, they're in the pants pocket from that outfit that I wore.
Yep.
But you can't access that when you're in that state of panic, right? Where your body's perceiving that you are somehow just needing to survive this very stressful moment.
Mm-hmm.
So re-engaging that prefrontal cortex to the extent that it's developed for teens is going to give you and them the most success for those more logical, rational, reasonable conversations. They're
Yep.
having to tell their body, I'm actually okay, right?
Yes,
I'm safe. And there's lots of different strategies that we can help, teens to
for
do
sure.
that, to be equipped to do that. So let's just talk a little bit about, how therapy helps teens struggling. We're kind of all over the place here, but
Yeah.
let's talk specifically about therapy and, how would maybe we encourage a parent to bring their teen out to therapy, or a teen to reach out and express a need for therapy. Where does it fit into this? How can we help them?
Yeah, so I think that the more support, the better, but specifically psychotherapy, it brings a place of validation, non-judgmental, safe place. They don't need to
Mm-hmm.
worry about someone taking their information and stabbing them in the back later,
Mm,
or posting about it on social media. It's a safe place, but also realistically, it is very hard for a parent to say, I love you, you're safe, when they just got called all the names in the book because the child or the youth was reacting. Like, let's
mm-hmm.
realistically saying, I hate you, I don't want to live here anymore, you suck, blah, 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 blah. And then
Yeah,
you're supposed to go and be supportive and safe and loving that's hard,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
when you have a person who's removed from that type of back and forth, it's a lot easier to
Mm-hmm.
show that type of non-judgmental attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like getting help in that area, because we're all human and we're reacting. And I mean, we think, oh, they have anxiety and depression. It seems like a like a victim in some sort, like they're some type of recipient of the thing. But the
Right.
reality is that youth with anxiety and depression, they can be quite cruel to their parents, cruel to people around
Mm-hmm.
them. Not saying
Mm-hmm.
it's good, bad, or it should be excused or anything like that. I'm just saying that it happens,
That's right. Because they're
right?
dysregulated.
They're dysregulated. And so
Yeah.
they can be really, really hard to love. So if you
Mm-hmm.
can get support with somebody who can kind of make sense to them,
Mm-hmm.
that's beneficial. And
Yeah.
also someone outside of the home. Because as soon as, we are all very connected and relationships are important, but as soon as you get a teen, the relationships that are important are changed. They're not
Mm-hmm.
inside the home anymore, they're outside of the home.
Mm-hmm.
Therapist is outside the home, and they're
Mm-hmm.
way more likely to listen to a therapist, a teacher, a friend's parent than you. And that sucks. I get
Right.
that.
But
But
it's
it's the case.
reality.
Right. So having those external supports help your youth
Mm-hmm.
so that you can navigate how you are going to handle this and making sure
Mm-hmm.
that you're okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then that actually helps to support both.
And you don't have to step into the counselor role. Like I had the unique experience of being a mom who actually is a counselor, but lots of
Mm-hmm.
moms feel like they have to feel that fill that mental health counselor role. And that's a problematic dynamic because, like you say, it doesn't have the objectivity. No matter how close you are with your kids, they're still self-censoring with you. They're not going to tell you everything because you're their parent, right? And they
Yeah.
still care about what you think, and they might tell you things that they know you don't want to hear. And so you need to be able to be the parent and not feel like you're responsible to be, all those other roles that don't have to be yours any more than you have to be a doctor or a physiotherapist or a teacher to your kids. There are people in their lives that are filling those roles, and a therapist can be one of those really great safe adults, because we know there's so much research for teens around success in school and in life when they have other safe adults building into them,
Yeah.
in addition to their parents, coaches, teachers, therapists, youth group leaders, whoever it is. There's people who are building into your kids, and it's important to have a team. It's important to have some coordinated care around that, and
Yeah.
not feel that burden is solely on you. And so, yeah, we have a real heart for teens here at Covey Wellness Center. Most people know my story is that I was a high school teacher before I became a therapist, and so I have spent a lot of time around teens. I'm now a mom of basically 4 teens. One is 20 and one is 12, but like we're pretty much in the teen years for all 4 of them right now. And, and so our heart goes out to them. And we have a lot of people who really want to see them thriving and navigating this developmental stage with as much health as they can, and strength in their relationships, in their families and in their social world, and also finding their way in the world. It's a big stage of change and growth and decisions, and it's a lot. And so even in the best of times, we would recommend therapy for teens, just bringing that safe adult into their lives for these kinds of conversations that just keep them healthy, keep them on their way. So if you're listening to this and you are a parent of a teen, or you are a teen, or you know a teen that you think is going to want some help or need some help, we would love to be that space for them to come. You can easily go to the Covey Wellness Center website and just fill in the contact us form that's there, and start the process of getting them connected with a therapist who is a good fit for them. But absolutely, the kids are in need of support. And so if you're feeling the tug on your heartstrings to make sure you as a parent is well supported in caring for your teens, and that your teens are getting the right support, we are here for you. We can see children 10 years old and older who can engage in talk therapy. So we have opportunities for people who are 10 and older, as long as talk therapy is a format that works for them. And so that's what we can do for you. Any final comments before we sign off here today, Rebekah, that you want to leave people with? We've had a meandering conversation about lots of things.
It's been good.
But hopefully it's been informative, and people have tracked with us and have a little bit better understanding about these issues and how it's facing teen mental health. So yeah, if you have any questions, follow up, reach out. If you feel comfortable, please rate and subscribe the podcast so others can find it, share it. We're wanting these resources to be out there to help people and make it accessible to people so that they can continue to engage in these conversations in their homes and in their lives, and know that there's resources out there for them. So thanks again, Rebekah, for coming in today virtually. And I appreciate the conversation and all the work that you're doing with kids and teens and beyond, but today with our focus here at Covey Wellness Center. And I look forward to another conversation in the future.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a great day. And thanks again for tuning in.